Thanks a lot. It's really great to be here. And I should say I speak as a Canadian, certainly, but also I have kids in Alberta. I'm anchored in Alberta. I have a company there as well as the job at Harvard. So I think a lot about what the trade-offs are going to be from that perspective. It's very popular to talk about Canada as an energy superpower. And strangely, at least sometimes, both sides of the political fence are able to agree on that. So that's true of those who hope for a continued boom in oil and gas, but also there's a bunch of literature in which people who hope for a transition to low-carbon, new, innovative, clean energy think about us as a potential energy superpower because of all the immense amounts of potential wind or solar we have. And so we have a kind of magic, a big tent of kind of magical elasticity that allows us to think we're happy together. And I think it's a really dangerous myth for really specific reasons. First of all, I don't think we're a superpower even in oil and gas, as at least I understand what energy superpower has meant in the political economy of oil. So it's true that the large-scale oil sands resource base matches some of the world's largest resource bases, no argument. But it's a relatively high capital cost play, and one where you cannot easily swing production volumes. So you do not have the kind of power in political power terms that countries that had large amounts of conventional resources had. In lots of ways, it's socially a wonderful kind of oil boom compared to Norway's because it has lots of skilled workers, which is great, whereas Norway's experience is more like money being dropped from heaven offshore. But it does not give you that kind of political superstar status. Second, much of the technology involved in oil sands have very limited export potential because this really is close to, not perfectly, a special case. Finally, as measured by money, patents, leading technology vendors, you care and name it. We are a pretty minor contributor in solar, wind, biofuels, nuclear power. So I think it's really important to be honest about the scale of this country. There are many fantastic advantages Canada has. I'll come to them. This is not a counsel for despair. It's a plea for some realism with specific implications for public policy. So you see where I am. So just a few moments to say that though I've said some negative things, I'm proud. I personally helped to found a little tiny clean tech startup that is trying to capture CO2 from the air to make low carbon fuels to compete with electric vehicles and biofuels. We've raised $50 million roughly, and we're building a real pilot plant in Vancouver this year. So I couldn't be more invested in hoping to make this work. And if I could have, I would very happily have stayed at University of Calgary if we were able to build a vibrant Canadian energy think tank there. I would say success in these endeavors in many, bold, derives from a combination of two things. Bold dreams aggressively pursued for sure. So there's nothing wrong with a kind of superpower dream in that sense. It's fine to have a big dream. But that's got to be combined with day-to-day realism that enables smart decisions, and especially the kind of realism that you have to have in business and in government if you're going to be sensible, which is the realism to kill things that aren't working. There are lots of examples of bad decisions. The fundamental problem is that Canadian public policy in lots of things, but I'm talking about energy, has had a habit of spreading money everywhere, this kind of everybody gets a little bit method that ensures we won't succeed on anything. I was lucky enough to have a great experience serving when I came back to Canada first on the Bruneau Commission, where we had a wonderful staff and were able to really spend a lot of...
C'est moi. C'est moi.
We can hear you now, but now I'm in the middle of my talk, if you don't mind. Je connais pas français. And in that Bruneau Commission experience, I really got a chance to see up close in detail a bunch of the ways that we were spending our money, and some of them were truly sad. There were people in the federal government who really imagined we were going to help ignite a wind power technology industry here with pots of money that were of order of $1 million. So at this point, it was a little different then. The biggest wind power technology companies have sales around $10 billion a year. It is conceivable we could get in that business, but it would take a level of effort comparable to a level of effort that got us seriously in the kind of aerospace cluster that we have with Pratt & Whitney and Bombardier. And that's the level of effort we're talking about. And in the face of that, one has to either be honest that one's not going to do it or do it in a serious way. The middle ground is just senseless. I could say the same about two other things, but let me first focus on one crucial thing, which is that I do not think we can succeed in making a sustainable in the social sense, that is able to get widespread public support that allows the sustenance of policies that put, say, a high price on carbon or whatever method gradually force the decarbonization of the economy. We will not get that level of social support unless we have some industries that have a very high value added in Canada. Now, that is not a plea for protectionism. I embrace the fact we're in a globalizing economy, and I don't believe we should prevent all imports by any means. But let's be clear, if we're going to install wind turbines or solar power that are made elsewhere, we're going to produce jobs that are not the very highest value jobs. The value added associated with those technologies goes to the companies that are the nexus of building them. And those are the companies that produce the very highest quality jobs and the kind of cosmopolitan workforce, which is what we want as a society and what stable societies need to have. So this has been particularly evident in Alberta, where for intentions that we can argue about, the Alberta government's collected some real carbon levy and spent a lot of it on stuff that I would bluntly characterize as green bling. So they've installed small wind turbines and solar power and so on in a way that I cannot imagine there is any rational view that this will deal with the central risk that Alberta faces. The central risk is, at some point the world's going to regulate on carbon, and it's going to be crushing. And so what Alberta would like to do is be able to have, if you care about the people living there, and I do, is be able to have some businesses that are essentially a hedge against that could produce in principle or have a chance of producing, really large billion-dollar class value added under a strong carbon constraint. And importing other people's technology and installing it is not going to do that. So I think we really need to think hard about how to build a few industrial clusters in Canada that can really work. And that does mean some level of picking winners. I think there's no way out of it. And I very much like what James Meadowcroft pointed out earlier, which is, of course, that government does make lots of mistakes picking winners, but in fact, so do stock pickers and so does industry. It's a very hard thing to do, and we simply have to figure out how to do it better. And we have to figure out mechanisms that allow us to do some of it while still killing off the things that don't work. So I want to be clear, I'm advocating a kind of green industrial policy, but one that has limits. And I think the risks of such policies are clear. The risks are the kind of crony capitalism you get, where there's a flow of government money to a relatively small industry group, and it has a strong lobbying power, and it makes it very, very hard to stop. When I first came back to Canada from the US about 10 years ago, that was painfully evident in the hydrogen fuel cell business. I consulted with some senior people in Environment Canada. At that point, I and others at Carnegie Mellon were leaders of pointing out how unlikely it was we were going to have any kind of quick transition to hydrogen fuel cell transportation vehicles. And I had a fresh new policy forum in science, and I went and talked to people in NRCan, and they were completely unwilling to hear. They were so convinced that this was the deal, that rational arguments about what the actual ways that technological change might propagate through the automotive industry were just not countenanced. And so that's not a case, that's a case where we could have made better decisions. We could have killed the hydrogen fuel cell boom earlier and therefore wasted less human and financial capital. So we need to have the kind of good decision making that allows us to do that, but we've also got to have the permission to make some mistakes. No process of doing this is going to be devoid of significant mistakes. Mistakes are part of the game, just as they are part of the game for venture capital. So I've given a little bit, but the fundamental thing is that Canadian government funding for energy R&D, and by funding I'm meaning broadly, direct funding, stimulus, et cetera, has been characterized by subcritical investments essentially everywhere. And we need to find a way to combat that head on, to get the Canadian public to realize that that just is not an effective way to spend money. And we have to be willing to take some political risks if we want to get any rewards. One of the ones that I like the best is what may have been the original foundation here, I'm not sure, was the wonderful network centers of excellence that Canada has. I was involved in a few of these, and I mean, I would put it in the dictionary as an oxymoron, right? Is it a network or is it a center? In practice, what they usually are is a way to fund stuff people are more or less already doing anyway, but kind of put a wrap around it and makes it seem like it's really some big integrated thing. Very few of them, I think, have actually been that. And what it shows is the kind of Canadian government's systematically unwillingness to have a few winners. Because if you're really going to succeed, you're going to have to do that. So what are some pathways forward? I think the number one is to actually put more money in, but take some of the money that we now have spread in these millions of subcritical investments and really find some structure that allows us to have a hard-nosed discussion about what the small set of things we're really going to push are. And that decision has to pay real attention to what the actual strengths are. Strengths in terms of the structure, the kinds of corporations we have, the kinds of expertise they have, the kinds of social and physical capital we have. We have lots of it. But we should not be naive about what we have and don't have, and have to think seriously about what it does. One example that I use sometimes with Alberta industry is a way to kind of try and surprise people, I think, about what the actual skills they have there are. I mean, the easy answer is what Alberta's good at is oil and gas. But another way to think about it is what the Alberta industry is really good at is executing very large, very complex, high capital projects, projects that involve a kind of heavy chemical engineering component, and executing those projects in an environment where people don't like them very much. And they're very, very good at it. They've got some of the best expertise in the world in that ability. And so if you think about what those human skills and some of the corporate skills could do, are they likely to succeed in, say, diffused solar? I doubt it. It's just not the right mix. One thing that they might be able to succeed on is new nuclear power. I'm somebody who believes that if we're really serious about bringing carbon emissions towards zero over the next sort of my lifetime, it's pretty hard to do it if you don't have nuclear power because of just the ability to make gigawatt class carbon-free power with pretty low land use footprints. There's room for argument about that, but let's just take it for a given that we might want to do that. The problem with innovating new nuclear power is actually not the nuclear engineers. That's the easy part. All the hard part is the process controls, the chemical engineering, and the industrial and financial structures that are capable of executing. At this point, Korea is actually able to build reactors on hard deadlines with hard contracts with, say, UAE, not because their reactors are any better than the ones built here, but because they have an industrial structure that's enabled them to execute. And so we often think of innovation as primarily the kind of new nice piece of science. For nuclear reactors, that's not it at all. It's all about disciplined execution. And in fact, Alberta has that kind of expertise, and if some Alberta billionaires wanted to, there's no reason they couldn't get serious about developing new nuclear power startups. I have quite a few colleagues I work with. I serve as advisor to Bill Gates and others who are putting real money, in some case 100 million class money, into developing nuclear power plants that might be in various ways safer, more proliferation resistant, what have you. There's no such effort that I know of at any level of seriousness in Canada, and you got to ask yourself why. But that wasn't meant to be, I should say, an overall claim that nuclear is the right thing. I could take it or leave it. It's an argument that we need to focus, and we need to think very carefully about what the actual structure of our current strengths and weaknesses are that allows us to actually play in a new world. So in closing, I'd like to say that I hope this conversation, and the first talk already did a great job doing that, moves us away from some of the, I think, kind of sterile debate that has characterized a lot of the economics community in Canada on this between taxes and cap and trade. It's an interesting debate. You can publish a lot of papers on it, but it's not clear that it gets at the really hard choices that we have to make as Canadians about how we would actually do this. And those choices are all filled in the rich specific details about the interprovincial competition and the intersectoral competition and how we find politically stable ways to manage that avoid us having the kind of throw good money after bad phenomena, but allow us to do what I think a small country must do, which is focus on a relatively small number of industrial sectors. The view of sort of letting laissez-faire capitalism just do it and getting government out of the way, I think is actually much more plausible if you're a country the size of the US or China. But I think it's significantly less plausible if you're a country the size of Canada. Thanks very much.